Good afternoon. Here we are once again. So today's going to be, again, a little bit different. Instead of figures or toys themselves, we're going to talk a little bit about history and the people that are actually responsible for those toys that you have. Now, of course, the company that we all know and love is Kenner. And Kenner has, some history. I think most people probably know a little bit about it, but Kenner being established in the late 40s by the Steiner brothers, had some early products that, most of us know, whether it's Easy Bake or anything like that. Then in the late 60s, General Mills bought several companies, actually. They bought Parker. They bought Kenner, and then it wasn't until, 76 that Kenner moved into the very famous Kroger building at 1014 Vine Street, and then the magic happened, okay? And then, of course, as the Return of the Jedi had kind of started to fade away and, the Star Wars future was very unclear, in 85, actually, things were separated, and Kenner Parker was made its own division. And then, of course, Tonka, for Tonka Trucks, comes and buys Kenner Parker, and then it divides it all up, Kenner Toys being one division of that. And then in 91, Hasbro actually buys Tonka, okay, and then in effect buying Kenner. And then we all know what's happening since that time. But anyways, so, one of the things I also collect are business cards. And I think business cards are a very personal item in terms of history, meaning that this is what these people handed out, or if they did, or, the company probably just gave a big box and it sat on the shelf. But anyways, this is what people handed out so that they could tell me, here is who I am and the company I work for. I mean, that's a pretty personal item. So it's nice to collect business cards, and especially business cards of the people that kind of had some pretty, let's say, heavy hands in some of the big moments at Kenner, or at least in toy history. Now, believe it or not, there is a recent book that was put out. Most everybody knows what it is, Engineering an Empire, this book right here. Now, this is a fantastic book. Gary, Matt, and Steven, worked on this. There was a lot of people behind the scenes. Chase doing the design, or I think it was pretty much designed by Chase. But anyways, fantastic book. Lots of stories and photographs of people. But one of the things they have photographs are some of the business cards, and I think that that's always very interesting. So, of course, a lot of the information I got from here, but I quite honestly did not know about this before I had started collecting the business cards. So the fact that this came within the last several years was quite coincidental and quite nice. So anyways, great book. I suggest you buy it. So anyways, one of the first cards I'll talk about is this guy, Dewey. All right. So the interesting thing, it says he was a development lab supervisor. Okay. So what they worked on are basically the materials. Now, because the size of the figure was not a standard size, most of the, I'll call them dolls, but most of the dolls that were put out were of the 12-inch, the G.I. Joes, the Barbies, stuff like that. And so the fact that, the infamous 3 3/4 inch measurement was new. I mean, it wasn't totally new, but it was new in the sense that it was going to be new for Kenner. And so they had to go through materials testing, whether it's, mechanical strength, whether it's chemicals that they use in the plastics, whatever it is. And this particular individual was in charge of the majority of those testing. And so that's a very significant how would I put it, place in the history of Kenner Toys. Now, when it comes to making things, Rosenfield, old Bud here, this is I love this card because it has all his sort of tools around the PS. It's just a pretty neat card. But anyways, so what he was known for is basically he did a lot of the wood modeling, because remember back then, I think we've seen it in a couple of documentaries where they would actually build wood models. And the one thing that he brought to Kenner and to the toy line, more so than probably anyone else, is that he was very, very, very detail-oriented. And in fact, asked if he could bring in some of his ideas to the wood models that would eventually translate into more realistic toys for all of us to enjoy 40 years later. But anyway, so he had a very important sort of role in that. And so I find him to be a very important guy in the history of the company, and especially the history of the toys. Now, this is a very interesting guy here, Larry Saup. Okay, so one of the things that was very interesting about Kenner is that we all know that they kind of got themselves in a bind, meaning that the license wasn't really obtained until really very, very soon before the movie was going to come out. And of course, that did not allow them any time whatsoever to make toys. And of course, to make toys, there are multiple steps in the process, whether it goes to making the, first the design, then you have sometimes the wood models or some sort of proto mold or some precursor, and then you have the engineering pilots, and then so it's got to go through all these phases. And all those phases typically require a different department, and they go back and forth, and hey, do you approve this? Do you approve that? And so that took a lot of time. And so, unfortunately, this guy, no pressure for this guy, he was basically given the task, hey, you need to put this stuff out as soon as you can. You need to cut processing by half the time that you normally take. And so that was a big deal. And so the way that they sort of, let's say, worked around it is they started, their areas of expertise started to cross over. And so what it allowed is sort of more efficient processing, and a lot of the processes would work simultaneously. So if they had, concept art, mold making, again, engineering pilots that were made from the pre-production model, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff was kind of running simultaneously. And there's a word for it. I was trying to look for it. What did they say? Oh, yeah, they had people working 24/7, and they said womb to tomb. That's kind of the line they talked about, the essentially the long assembly line. So anyway, so that he was very, very, very important in that. And basically changed. Kenner was doing this sort of overlapping expertise or let's say maximizing efficiency well before it became industry standard. And so he's a very, very important guy in the company. Now, Steve Hurt, this one right here, now he didn't come to Kenner until 79, so it was pretty much right in the middle, or at least right at the beginning of getting the Empire Strikes Back toys out. And so one thing that he was he was a machinist, model builder type guy. And what he brought is the idea of different plastics, especially like urethane. So when you see these multicolored limb prototypes, this is the guy that supposedly was responsible for bringing that, instead of having somebody do the pre-pro in one step. You could do different ones and all bring them together. And so he seemed to be very responsible of that. In fact, he basically made samples from patterns, is the way he put it. But anyways, so, and this is an interesting card because this was his card after Tonka. You see Tonka, Parker, and Kenner were on there. Now, this is just always an interesting. Jane Abbott is basically Kenner's fashion guru. She was responsible for a lot of the doll lines, but also the 12-inch clothing for Star Wars. So it was very interesting for her, is that she was the, the Karl Lagerfeld or the Versace of Kenner. I just thought it was funny. All right. Then we have people like, Charlie Morris. Now, Charlie Morris was a quality control engineer in Kenner. There's not too much information on him out there, but what was interesting is got information from Matt that the protomold FET as well as the Lando 12-inch was actually found at his house, and so obviously was very well involved in that. Now, Gripperline, this is a card that you have seen very recently in the basically almost production rocket launching or rocket firing FET, basically mailers or mail samples. I know Alexander from Mark Alexander from Australia had one all packaged up. This guy had, I think, 3 of them, meaning 3 J-slot, almost production FETs, 2 rockets with the mailer box, and this guy is the one that owned them. So anyways, so he was clearly involved. He is basically the safety engineer, or what they call it, the reliability engineer. So he basically made sure that products were durable. And I think that the little J hook on there that would break off, he was the one probably for trying to break them off. But anyways. So the last one I'll talk about are 2 of my favorites. The ones I love the most and hate the most. And that is, the first one is Tim Pine. Now, Tim Pine was basically the product safety guy. He, along with Mr. Kipling, whom we all know is the sole Kenner attorney, basically the Toys That Made Us, made him very well known, which is very interesting guy. But anyway, so these 2 together, Tim and Mr. Kipling, were the people responsible for killing the rocket firing FET. Anyway, so they're the ones that finally said, hey, this can't go. We're having too many issues, so we need to shut it down. Anyways, well, that's just a little bit about little Kenner history, some of the business cards that are involved from the former employees, a little bit of their stories. I find it interesting. Now, of course, I don't have all the ones I want, so I even made a little list of the ones that I'm looking for. I should have written them backwards. You probably could read it then. So Bernie Loomis and Joe Mendelson were 2 of the presidents of Kenner. Bernie Loomis, by far, probably the most well-known. Howard Bollinger, Mark Boudreau, we all know who he is. David Ozaka, James Swearengin, or of course we know Jim. The one I really want is Lewis Cartwright. I've never seen that one. And then, of course, Rudy Vapp, who had a lot to do with FET as well. So anyways, all right, well, hopefully that was a little informative. It's probably one of the more lackluster topics, but for me, it's very interesting. I love the history of it. I love seeing what these people do and how they came together to kind of produce what is really kept me interested in 40 plus years. So anyways, all right, guys, see you later. Stay safe. Do what's necessary as always. Till next time.